Hi there, it's good to be talking to you again. Helen and I are back from a couple of weeks away in the west of Ireland, and it was great. A change of scene, seeing friends and family, um, and in-laws as well. I really recommend it, a change of scene if you can get one. We were in Connemara, Mayo and Sligo, each quite different in its own way, but each with some amazing beauty. Because I love to get out in the wilds, whether it's up a hill, in the sea, across a bog, along the shore, wherever. And we got all that and more. The west of Ireland really has it all going on. But if you're watching this from across the Shannon and you need a change of scene, then the east coast is great as well. And you can get away from all the dubs coming over to the west. Getting into the wild is good for you. It's good to clear the head and change your perspective. Away from the desk, the shop, the phone, the TV, the household chores, all that stuff that crowds in on us all the time. But the wilds are not always comfortable. Some of the coasts we were walking on in Mayo had some really big cliff drops right down into the sea, and they're beautiful and I love it, but they give me the heebie-jeebies. And even when you're up on a hill or walking across a bog, when you hear a strange, unexpected sound, it can get pretty spooky. Or when you've lost your bearings a bit, you can really start getting worried. And talking to various people recently, the word that's been coming up a lot is that uncomfortable, awkward. You know, we've all come through massive changes since the start of this year. And okay, now that many workplaces are back up and running a bit more fully, now that we're able to go out and get a coffee or a meal, now that all the plans are getting back in place for the schools to reopen again at the end of the month, it's like we're trying to get back to things as usual, but nothing is quite the same as before. Everything feels uncomfortable and awkward. Keeping apart from one another, not giving each other handshakes or hugs, wearing face coverings, not being able to try on clothes in the shops. In the grand scheme of things, they're not the worst things in the world, but they all add up to that sense of unease and awkwardness. And this weekend, the renewed restrictions in the Midlands also remind us that this is not over by any means. It's not comfortable. And okay, I see the wilds as a bit of recreation. But when we look at times in scripture, in the Bible, when people went into wild places, it was very different usually. Happens to a lot of people, actually. It's a bit of a motif. And usually it's a really important time, even though it's uncomfortable and awkward. A couple of examples. Moses had to flee the comfort of the royal court that he'd grown up in and spent many years out in the wilderness until he came back to Egypt a different man, humbled, willing to be led by God and therefore ready to lead the people. David was a young, good-looking, energetic, talented guy who was handpicked to work for the king. But again, he had to run for it, hiding out in deserts and caves while he learned how to lead a wide range of people, how to make strategic decisions, how to make long-term plans, until it was time for him to become king himself. Many of the prophets spent time in the wilds. Poor old Jonah, probably the wildest of all. But two particular wildernesses that are very well known were the ones that the people of Israel went through after they escaped from slavery in Egypt. And that's described in Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy and referred to nearly all the way through the Bible. And the wilderness that Jesus spent 40 days in immediately after his baptism, which you see in the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke. They're deliberately connected by the Bible writers and they echo each other, and yet they're quite different. The thing about these wilderness experiences is they weren't a nice walk in the hills before heading back to a cozy bed. They were a real state of being caught in between two things, in between two phases of life, two states of being. There was the known past, and for the Israelites that meant their time of slavery in Egypt. And a lot of the time that was terrible, with forced slave labor. But when they got into the wilderness, sometimes they looked back on it fondly. Oh, the food we had there, and we knew what was happening, and it was predictable. As the saying goes, the past might be another country, but sometimes it can be a very familiar one, and one that we romanticize a bit. Ah, the good old days. And it can be hard to leave it behind because of that. For Jesus, He'd had 30 years living, as far as we know, an unremarkable life, probably fairly settled and predictable. But things were about to change. In both cases, whatever the future held was unclear. Yeah, there were hopes, there were signposts, but they were not 100% sure how everything was going to pan out. And in the meantime, there was this in-between time in the wilds. Now, of course, every day, every present is a transition between the past and the future. It's an in-between time. But there are times when we feel it more, when it's more of a wilderness time. And I think that in the big picture of things, this year for many, many people is one of those times. Even simple things like watching a TV program that was made before the pandemic just seems so strange because we see groups of people standing next to each other and hugging and not wearing face coverings and all this kind of stuff. Even the very recent past is already another country, and we long for it. But was it all as good as we think it was? Of course not. It was just familiar and comfortable, at least looking back on it. And the future is definitely uncertain. A constant round of questions. How will the schools and colleges function? Will the pubs be able to reopen? When will it be safe to travel and return without having to quarantine? Will there be an effective vaccine or treatment anytime soon? And this on top of all the normal uncertainties of work and jobs and family and health and so on. So stuck in between, what's the story? How can we stay sane and even flourish in a season of in-betweenness? There's plenty of advice and opportunity out there, but looking at these two particular wildernesses from the scriptures, what can we see? Well, the first thing is, God led the way into the wild. We love to think of God as always bringing us close, bringing us to a safe place, comforting us. But the fact is that sometimes he leads us or allows us to get uncomfortable first. That's what happened to the Israelites, even as they escaped from harsh slavery and experienced the amazing miracle of crossing the Red Sea. Immediately, almost the next sentence, it says they were led into what looked like insecurity and lack. Exodus 15:22 says, "Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water." Moses, led by God, led the people into a dry wasteland. And it's the same with Jesus. Immediately after being baptized in the Jordan and the Holy Spirit appearing and coming on him, it says this, "At once the Spirit sent him out into the desert, and he was in the desert for 40 days. Now this gets us into the whole territory of what God sends and what he allows. I don't believe he sent a pandemic on the world, but he has certainly allowed it. And it's taken us into a place of discomfort, of uncertainty, and in many cases lack or fear of lack. Why? What's going on? Why would he allow or even deliberately lead people into a situation like that? Brings us to the second point. God was teaching trust. Let's face it, God is always teaching people trust. Let's read on in Exodus.
When they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink. So they called the place Marah, which means bitter. Then the people complained and turned against Moses. "What are we going to drink?" they demanded. So Moses cried out to the Lord for help, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it into the water, and this made the water good to drink. It was there at Marah that the Lord set before them the following decree as a standard to test their faithfulness to him. He said, "If you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, obeying his commands and keeping all his decrees, then I will not make you suffer any of the diseases I sent on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." After leaving Marah, the Israelites travelled on to the oasis of Elim, where they found 12 springs and 70 palm trees. They camped there beside the water.
So for these guys, once they were led out into the wilderness, not only was the glass half empty, but when they found something, a bit of water in the glass, it tasted bitter. And through what seems to us a bizarre act of obedience with a piece of wood, that bitterness was turned sweet and the people were able to drink safely. God provided. First, he heard their cry, he answered them. But then he spoke and he made a promise to them. Keep your ears open and your hearts ready to respond to me, and I'll protect you, I'll heal you, I'll keep providing for you. This is actually one of those really special times when God reveals something powerful about himself by giving himself a new name, the Lord who heals you. But first there was a testing, not a pass-fail test, but a proving of what was inside the people, showing them that they were trusting in him. And then he led them to a place with plenty of water. And as they went on in their journey, he provided for them day after day with daily bread, the manna, with birds to eat, and with lots and lots of other provision. And it was the same with Jesus. When he was in the wilderness, it was a time of testing of him. The devil came to him, tempting him to miraculously provide for his own bread. It was like he was saying, well, the Israelites got their bread in the desert. You're the Son of God. Sort it out. Off you go. But Jesus knew this was a time of testing, and he chose to keep trusting in what the Father was saying and how he was leading him. He had to stand firm against Satan first before he could eat again. And when he did eventually break that fast, it seems like he didn't need to fast again until after the Last Supper. He even had a reputation as a bit of a party eater. Where am I putting my trust in this season? Am I trying to work out everything for myself? In terms of protecting one another from the virus, it's good to listen to people who know more than we do, to take the advice. But they can't make me feel at peace inside about how all the restrictions are affecting me. Or they can't ease my worries about myself or others. That's the role of God the Father in my life. And in this time of testing, the questions he's asking us are you going to trust me? Are you going to listen for my voice? Are you going to let me lead you the next step? An example, at the start of all this, I was really concerned about the finances for the church. Overnight, we lost all the people hiring the church centre, which meant a big drop in income. On top of that, with the work situation, we didn't know how it would affect people in the church. We prayed, we discussed, we took decisions. And you know what? We've seen God provide. Even though we maybe in panic took some money out of savings, we haven't had to use it and we've been able to put it back. And over the last couple of weeks in the special offering that we've been having, we've had nearly €2,000 come in, over and above people's regular giving. And likewise, the Loaves and Fishes Cafe has been able to carry on serving takeaways week after week through the generosity of individuals and businesses and organizations. There was a test, and God was asking, are you willing to trust me? Are you going to let me provide for you? And we've seen him come through. Is it comfortable? No. Is it encouraging? Yes. There are still loads of questions about the weeks and months ahead, but we literally have that in the bank, not just in cash, but in terms of proved experience, that God knows what he's doing and he's working things out for those who love him and are following him. Most of us don't like change, especially change that's forced on us, yeah? And we've had lots of that this year. Just when we feel we're just about getting used to things, the ground shifts again and we're forced to deal with more differences, more decisions. It's uncomfortable. But like the Israelites and Jesus in the desert, times of discomfort are times of forming something in us. They ask questions of us that we wouldn't normally face up to, which gives an opportunity for growth. We've looked a few times at the letter of James recently, and the letter starts with a pretty confronting challenge, backed up with a promise.
Dear brothers and sisters, When troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has had a chance to grow, so let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing.
Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to look at some of the things involved in that process, about what it is to be living in the wilds and having God do new things in us, to grow through uncomfortable times when we're caught between one place and another. Because it's in the present that God works to bring us out of our past and into our future with hope and courage. And he's doing that right now if we'll let him. So how do we respond? I think the questions are, am I willing to trust God with the things that are making me uncomfortable, that make me feel like I'm in the wilds? Am I willing to let him use them to grow trust and faith in me? Maybe just take a moment to name them in your mind right now. What are those areas of discomfort? That's the first step. Just name them, acknowledge them. And then say, Lord, I choose to trust. I choose to let you speak about these things. I choose to let you bring some changes in me that'll help me move forward. And trusting will take a lot of steps and a lot of those conversations with God, giving them back to him again and again until we can truly leave them with him. Yes, God allows us to go into the wilds sometimes, but it's always so that he can do something good in us and prepare us for what's to come. God bless you.